Happy Ending, Years Alone, Then Not, by Bakurakrazie. This story is based off of DeLimefull's How Easy You Are to Need. Chapter 1. Helping establish yet another transformation nuzzle. That first full moon, he'd been surrounded by his humans. Dealing with the apparently greater than he could have thought misconceptions aside, it had been nice. Mostly. He hadn't paid much attention to it, of course, not with the "I'm a bigger idiot than I even knew" revelation, but there had been something missing, something off, something that could have been better. Over the next several months, and subsequent full moons, things changed. He could practically hear Patton's "You mean aside from your shifting?" joke, and resolved not to bring up that particular turn of phrase out loud. At least not around Logan, for his sake. He certainly shifted around the full moon, but it wasn't exactly a rare moment that he was found in his wolf form the other 3 weeks of the month. He didn't necessarily sleep while shifted, but when he did, one or more of his humans would join, cuddled around him, arm over his furry pelt like he was nothing more than a slightly oversized dog. But that was the rest of the time. Around the full moon was another story entirely. He hadn't realized it fully back when he was by himself in the forest, day in and day out, but his personality was naturally a little different around the time of the moon. He'd always had a natural inclination to monitor the perimeter of his forest, watching over it. He'd always prevented it from magical damage, unnatural threats, dangerous intruders, save 3 humans that could have so easily been threats. That had been true no matter what point in the month it was, so he'd never noticed an increase in feelings when the moon was waxing. Now, however, he'd noticed that he'd become a little more territorial. Or maybe a little more than a little more territorial. He'd been embarrassed when Logan had idly asked him about it one day, in between moons, but he secretly felt that he couldn't help himself. Especially after all they'd been through, back when he'd had those unbelievable beliefs. So it was now common that in the days leading up to the full moon, he'd give an extra lap or 2 around the forest. Mine. No one touches. Mine. Nobody hurts it. Nobody hurts them. Mine. Nothing comes between me and what's mine, mine, mine. His humans, meanwhile, would pile up in the big bed, able to fit all 4 of them with room to spare, and they would not cuddle up around Virgil. Instead, they arranged themselves all pressed together and allowed Virgil's big, fuzzy body to lie across all 3 of them as he snuggled into them. It was thus that Virgil found himself in bed on his back, a mockery of that first time he'd exposed his weak point to them, with Patton finally giving him belly rubs. He had to admit they really were quite nice. Patton was the only one of his humans that was ready for bed right now, but he was mostly able to push down the urge to worry about the others, mostly because he could still see them from his current position. He watched as they brushed their teeth, taking turns at the sink in the bathroom visible from the bedroom, and putting on their pajamas with the door closed. Virgil at least had enough sense that he didn't listen to the part of him that said he had to watch them get dressed. Privacy was privacy. But even if they had been willing to have him in the room with them, well, that was a layered issue anyway, and he'd get to dealing with that hopefully never. But now he enjoyed the belly rubs that Patton was so enthusiastically giving. The second that Logan came nearer to the bed, Virgil turned and jumped off, prompting a small yelp of surprise from Patton. He'd feel worse about that later, but he was too intent on circling around Logan, sniffing him to make sure everything was all right. If something had happened to him in the short time he hadn't been paying as much attention, he couldn't allow it. Nobody could touch. But he was fine. Virgil allowed himself to relax that much more, but not fully, until Roman was back too. He listened to Patton and Logan chatting idly, determining what their sleeping arrangements were, as Logan took off his glasses and other accessories. It wasn't long before Roman entered, and Virgil enthusiastically gave him the same once over, maybe thrice over, until he was satisfied. Roman chuckled and scratched behind Virgil's ears. He ended in a light tap on his nose, muttering a quiet boop. Patton pulled down the covers beside himself invitingly, and Roman bowed, once to Virgil to excuse himself, and once to Patton. Logan and Virgil shared an eye roll, but he followed after him as he headed for the bed anyways. Roman climbed on, settling next to Patton, and Logan followed suit. Virgil finally jumped on top of them, delicately, if he bruised them, or scratched them, or made them bleed, and laid down with his head on Logan's chest. They exchanged good nights, Virgil doing the best that he could in this form, and they gradually fell asleep. At some point during the night, Virgil woke to the sensation of someone trying to get out from underneath him. Well, that was just unacceptable. He growled lowly, opening his eyes, and turned to see Patton trying to wriggle away from under his haunches. He growled again, and Patton frowned, not stopping his movements. "I'm sorry, Virg," he whispered, trying not to wake the others, "but I have to pee." Virgil just growled at him again. That meant he had to get up. Not allowed. Virgil had to be on top of him to protect him, and Patton had to be in the bed to be protected. "Virgil," he whined, "I've gotta go. Come on." Virgil shook his head back and forth once. Didn't he know that in the calm of the night was a dangerous time to be up and around alone? Patton sighed. "Okay. How about you walk me to the bathroom so you can watch over me?" How did he know that was what the problem was? Logan must have discussed his theories with them, and knowing Logan, his theories were probably dead on. He should be mortified. Instead, he was glad of the offer, even as he grumbled in apparent reluctance. He gently rose onto his legs, careful not to shift the mattress too much, and lightly jumped off the bed. Patton made a relieved noise as he joined Virgil on the floor, immediately heading toward the bathroom. They were halfway through the door, Virgil alert at his side, when they heard Roman shift and speak. They looked back at the bed. Cold. And that was all the warning that he gave before hefting Logan up and over onto his body like a living blanket. Logan yelped loudly, waking up immediately, and struggled for a moment until he was able to gauge what had happened. Roman, somehow still half asleep, eyes closed, shushed Logan, patting him on the face. He huffed and accepted his fate, relaxing slightly, before giving Virgil and Patton a defeated look. Patton was shaking with silent laughter, leaning against Virgil slightly for support. Virgil gave Logan a wolfy grin, nudging Patton until he was upright, and came behind him to guide him the rest of the way to the bathroom. He waited outside the door, Patton snickering, eventually tapering off as he did when he needed to. Virgil kept an eye and both ears out, listening for anything off, either in or outside the house. Soon he heard Patton call out that he was almost done, along with a flush and the sound of him washing his hands, before coming back out to Virgil. He gave him a few scratches around his ears before returning to the bedroom with him. They had to pause at the doorway again, to allow Patton to be overwhelmed by cute. Logan seemed to have fallen asleep as he was, on top of Roman. As they composed themselves and walked closer, Logan's eyes fluttered open. "Help," he implored, not looking all that urgent. Patton hid another snicker before getting back in bed, gently tapping Roman on the shoulder. "Ro." He attempted to peel off one of his arms wrapped around Logan. "Come on, Virgil's back. You can let him go now." He gave another tug, which seemed to wake him up enough to relax his grip, and Logan was able to escape back to his spot with a heavy sigh. Roman started frowning again, hand reaching over towards Patton, so Virgil took that moment to jump onto the bed, back to his position by Logan, and return to his protective sleep pose. Immediately he felt Roman relax, which prompted him to relax also, safety assured once more. There was minimal movement as he waited for them all to fall asleep again, not content until they did, not able to quell his instincts until he was assured they were safe enough to stop watching over them. Maybe at some point they'd have to have a talk about it, or he'd be ashamed of it. Right now, though, as he felt Patton's arm swing over him, Roman clutching at his fur like a lifeline, and Logan cuddled up with his front paw between his arms, he didn't think they had much of a problem with it. In fact, he realized as he heard their breathing even out, it almost seemed as though they needed to watch out for him as much as he needed to watch out for them. He was asleep within the minute.